record on this computer. Approve the fact that you're all being recorded. And yeah, at some point I may ask people to show their lovely faces so that I can take a screenshot of us. Ryan's already got his up, and Anthony did for a while. All right. Anyway, is Victor here and Alex? Are you all there? You're all in Russia, right? Or one is Alex is, I think, right?
I'm from Germany.
Oh, from Germany. Yeah, that's right. You're in Ludwigshafen, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I remember. Because I'm having to approve all the purchases and put them in the email that I was sending yesterday.
Oh, okay.
And do you have a camera, or are you not? Your camera not working, or
And my camera's momentarily not working.
Momentarily not working. Well, I'll take ourselves a shot here, and we'll see what happens. Okay. Hello. All right. Cool. Okay. All right. So I will fade this out here, and what you've been listening to is some of Rich Vreeland's music for the game Hyperlight Drifter. So our special guest today, I would say, welcome to the second of on our ongoing series in talks called SpeedRuns at the Game Audio Institute. I am Scott Looney, your host for the evening or morning, whatever. And depends on what time you are, right? I guess. So that's the idea. And anyway, our special guest today is none other than Rich Vreeland, aka Disasterpeace. And he was the composer for a lot of things, actually. He did the retro level for Bit Trip Runner. He did the soundtrack for Fez, soundtrack for Hyperlight Drifter. He's involved in the Solar Ash Kingdom game as a technical audio designer, I guess, is close enough, or technical audio director, I would maybe say. And
designer.
Yeah. And let's see what else. He's done a film called It Follows, which is sort of like an indie film where he kind of pulled out his John Carpenter horror chops. And the other one was called Under the Silver Lake, which was like a short film, right?
No, it was a really long film, actually.
Oh, really long?
Film noir.
Okay. Film noir. Okay. And he actually did like a full orchestra on that one, I believe. And anyway, so yeah. I'll just sort of start this out, and because I do want to kind of, just sort of get the general background on, where you came from, little thumbnail sketch on things, and then, ask a couple questions, and we'll open it up about the halfway mark, and, to questions from anybody else if they want to ask them. So.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit of your background.
Sure. Let's see. Grew up in New York. Grew up in a musical family. I was always into video games. Was surrounded by music, but didn't really play music until probably I was a little older, like teenager, high school period. And sort of I was going down a certain trajectory. I was really into graphic design, and I went to college for it. I actually worked as a freelance web designer, did a bunch of logo design, that sort of thing. And that was kind of the path that I was going. But I sort of got into music late and found that I had a lot of ideas and energy for it. And ultimately I dropped out of school and applied to music school and went to Berklee College of Music, and started meeting other people and hearing about what's going on in the world of video games. And also kind of on the side, I was discovering people making music inspired by video games, whether it was like video game covers or chiptune music. And all of that was really inspiring to me, especially as a teenager who didn't really have any production chops. And that sort of became my way into that world. It was a way for me to get my ideas down really quickly, playing guitar. I found some like guitar tablature software, found that it had MIDI capability, and that was kind of the beginning of it for me. Once I realized that I could decouple writing music from actually playing an instrument. That sort of set me off on this trajectory of electronic music, and then video game music. And there were some fortunate bounces along the way. I was able to work on some different projects, do some internships. I did live performance for about 7 years.
Where'd you do internships?
Yeah, when I was at Berkeley, I heard about 2 internships. I ended up doing an internship at MIT at the Game Lab for a summer, and got to see what it would be like to be the audio lead on a project, more or less.
Wow.
I work with other people. So I did a bunch of sound design and music and implementation there. I also did a remote internship with a studio in Texas that's no longer around, called Pi Studios.
Mm-hmm.
They used to work on Bomberman and Bonk, and so I worked on a couple of projects with them. Yeah, so that those are some of my earliest like work experiences.
Yeah.
In games.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I was curious, like what you did at the internship, that kind of thing, and that was was interesting, really doing the MIT stuff, because of course they're kind of experimentally oriented, I would think.
Yeah, the program was basically for the, I guess, Media Lab students who had like research projects that had to do with education, and so they brought in like undergraduates, and the large majority of the undergraduates were from Singapore, which was also really interesting. Having not known anything about Singapore and getting to meet a bunch of people from there was really cool. So we basically got split up into groups, and each group was run by, I guess, like a fellow from the Media Lab, who was posing a specific research question about education. So ended up working on these 2 games called Waker and Whoosh that are basically the same game with different artwork.
Wow.
And they're both about trying to teach math concepts to high school students, specifically I think acceleration, displacement, and velocity. So like we all did there was a lot of brainstorming that happened, and it was totally collaborative, which was really cool. Like everyone was kind of a part of that process. Which is not always the case, but it was a pretty cool project.
Yeah, that's like a great game jam experience that lasts a good long time, or something like that. Kind of like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you've had your fills of like game jams where like the dynamic just does not work out for some reason or not. You got 8 artists, 2 programmers, or whatever. Yeah,
it was funny because the Game Lab was the place where like it was like the global game jam location. So
right.
I think I actually ended up doing that before I did the internship. So I was like, oh, it'd be really cool to work here. And then I ended up working there. So it's pretty sweet.
So
hey, Rich, a quick question. Steve Horowitz here. When you were at Berkeley, did you study with or encounter
Michael Sweet?
Michael Sweet?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Good friend of ours. Good friend of mine.
Yeah, he's great. I really enjoyed studying with him. I think I only had 1 or 2 classes with him, but I definitely enjoyed them. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, he's written like a tome on interactive music. It's huge.
I first met him when we were both living in Manhattan. So he's a good old friend.
Cool.
So sorry, I interrupted you in the middle of that, but I did want to sort of flesh that out a little bit. So
sure.
Continue on.
So like I said, I was doing internships at college. I'd basically started doing my own kind of original music. I initially kind of saw myself doing original music and doing commissions as separate, like separate trajectories.
Right.
And so the music stuff was all like, it was primarily like prog rock inspired chiptunes with guitar. And I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And at some point I just kind of felt like I could kind of combine the two for a while. And because I just was in a situation where I wanted to grow as a musician and as an artist, and like put myself in new situations. And so the career path kind of stuff of like finding game projects to work on was like very much in alignment with like what I wanted to do, like
Right.
artistically. So
Yeah.
I just kind of like combined all of it. And yeah, I kept doing that. I started like going to a lot of events. I went to GDC with college loan money, and got some of my first gigs there. I met Damian Kastbauer there.
Oh yeah, he's great, fantastic guy.
Yeah, and he kind of helped me out and gave me some work with I guess a company that he had at the time called Bay Area Sound. I ended up
I work for them.
I ended up working on. Did you? Okay. Yeah, I ended up working on like some Telltale game projects around that time, and was also like.
Did you get to know Jory? Jory Prum?
Jory?
Yeah, Jory Prum.
No, I don't. No, I don't think
he was also working with Bay Area Sound, because that's Julian Kwasniewski's sort of baby.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
And,
right. Yeah, I remember Julian.
Yeah.
I worked a little bit with Jared Emerson Johnson.
Right.
There.
Yeah.
But yeah, around the same time, I was also like just kind of put myself out there and meeting lots of people, going a lot to events. Yeah, started doing some, like I said, like working with Bay Area Sound. I did some work for them. I started kind of investigating the independent game scene, and started like working on some little projects that I would kind of come across online, where I would just reach out to people I didn't really know and be like, hey, here's some music here.
Yeah.
Went to a lot of game jams. I was doing a lot of different things, like all at the same time, basically. And then the internships ended up leading into other opportunities, because I got a referral from the audio director at the Game Lab to work at a studio called Demiurge in Cambridge. And so I ended up working there for a while while I was basically at the tail end of my time in Boston at Berkeley. I was their second choice, and the first person decided not to do it. And so I kind of found myself in this really fortunate situation, basically being the audio lead for a project at a studio. And so I was doing that full time for about a year. And around the same time, towards the beginning of that, around the same time, I had been a part of like a community of people who were doing live music in Boston called Boston 8-Bit. And we did a lot of chiptune shows, and we also went to other cities and played there. And we played a show in Montreal, and I met the programmer for Fez at a show in Montreal, and kind of hit it off. And I guess I might have been on their radar a little bit, but we had a really nice conversation, and they were talking about doing a compilation soundtrack for Fez, and I kind of pushed the idea of doing it myself. And
nice.
That worked out okay. So I was freelance, like remotely working on Fez at night, and I was working at this game studio in Cambridge during the day.
Wow.
Primarily making robot sound effects, and really just kind of putting myself through the paces of like what it means to do game audio, and kind of learning the ropes and figuring out what I wanted to do. And I basically, the takeaway from all of that was that I really liked the flexibility of being a freelancer, and I liked working on music more than I would like making sound effects and being like a 9-to-5 kind of person. So
like being a full-time in-house kind of person. So it was a really valuable time for me. And then after doing that after doing the robot stuff for like 9 months or so, which was a great experience, but I was ready to move on to something else, and I moved to San Francisco. I moved to Oakland actually. And I've been in California ever since, I think the last like 10 years or so. Yeah. Oakland and then LA. Yeah. All right. Very cool. All right. So I'm trying to think about a good question to ask here. So this is interesting that you did a little bit of the actual sound design and the audio lead type stuff, and you didn't just take the music path all the way through. And at the but it is interesting that, because I talk to the students, my students a lot about, the game jam as a path, potentially, that it's one of the things, and that game jams are really, really super valuable moments that are really useful to have even if they don't work out. Like everything is useful information for you in the future about a game jam. Obviously would be great to win the award and make the best soundtrack or whatever like that. But I always find that I've always told my students, no matter what happens at a game jam, it's going to be really useful information. You're going to see what works and what doesn't work, Anyway, so what would you say game jams taught you how to do essentially?
Yeah, I would say there was a ton of value in it for me to go and participate in game jams to a certain point. Like in the beginning, it was really useful, and I did I think I did like 4 or 5 game jams. And I mean, what I learned a lot about, well, I mean, I think the best part of it is just kind of getting your hands dirty and getting to work with lots of different people and sort of different kinds of game ideas that don't necessarily have a lot of weight behind them. Which kind of gives you more flexibility to participate in things that you might not be able to. It might be hard to get certain opportunities. I think there's a really great opportunity to build relationships at game jams. Like a lot of the people that I met at those game jams there are quite a few people who I still know and still like keep in touch with from those experiences. There's a certain camaraderie that I think comes out of it, especially the ones that are in person, over a couple of days or whatever. And it also allows you to experiment with kind of like what it is that you want to do and what you're interested in. I mean, I've done artwork at game jams. I've done, I've done coding at game jams. I've done sound design, music, implementation. I've done a little bit of like, everything, because you can kind of just show up and be like, hey, this is what I'm doing today. And that's totally cool. So I think they're really fun and interesting kind of thing to do and to try.
Yeah, I always found them really useful from one specific perspective, and that is how to turn around assets like as quickly as possible. Essentially, the idea is, of course,
True.
Jam. Therefore, everything's going pell-mell, and so they're like, yeah, we need 5 of this and a music loop, and it's all got to be done in like 8 hours or whatever.
True. Yeah, you do learn how to prioritize and kind of make decisions. Yeah, because you're so like limited in time and scope.
Yeah. That's cool. So your we had a nice discussion yesterday when we were sort of doing our pre warm-up-y kind of thing about dealing with 3D, actually, because weirdly enough, even though you've had a fair amount of experience doing games and stuff like that, you haven't been doing 3D oriented audio in games until just recently with this new one, Solar Ash Kingdom. And you've been messing around.
Solar Ash, yeah.
Yeah, it's just called Solar Ash.
I think they changed the name, to Solar Ash.
Okay, because I thought they were actually misprinting it on the card. And when I last saw the card, I'm like, wait a second, doesn't it have a kingdom afterwards? All right, so anyway, Solar Ash. And that you're making it with the Unreal Engine and that sort of stuff. And you were just sort of talking about, having to deal with the Unreal Engine and stuff like that. So can you give us a little bit more of the experience that you've been having dealing with that and kind of the various hurdles that you encountered and how you've tried to solve them as best as you can?
Sure. I mean, it was really interesting to me that I'd been working in games for over a decade and had never really done like a proper 3D engine type game. So that was one of the big allures for me personally in getting involved. And there's definitely a really robust education, just getting my hands dirty, just kind of, cranking up Unreal Engine and just kind of going to town on blueprints and kind of learning about vectors and 3D math and like all the sort of like considerations that go into how you implement sound in a 3D environment, and what are sort of the challenges and the bottlenecks and all that sort of stuff. And on a long project, there can be like a pretty sizable period of time where there's a lot of room for experimentation. And so like early on in that project, I did quite a lot of experimenting and just coming up with different ideas for systems while things are still in flux. And it was great to be in a situation where that was a possibility. Usually there isn't too much time to do that, and then you kind of have to hit the ground running and start getting into kind of building everything out. But there was a lot of time to experiment. Oh well, can we are we gonna can we do runtime synthesis in this project? Can we what can we, like, what are the performance like considerations? It was just like, it's been just a really significant learning process working on a game that's a game that is a 3D engine of a different sort of scope, a game with a large team, like all the ramifications of that, being on a project that starts small and then kind of like grows and grows over time.
Is this one
sort of changes what you can do?
Is this one of the largest projects that you've had to deal with as far as team size?
Yeah, I think so. As far as like the level of involvement and the team size, it probably is the largest that I've ever worked on, or close. So that has a certain feel to it as well, as far as like the difference between working with a couple of people and you kind of are on like a somewhat intimate basis with everybody, versus when you start working with dozens and dozens of people, it becomes harder to maintain that, and that sort of changes the dynamic as well. So yeah, I mean, there's just been different in just about every way that I can think of.
Yeah,
I'm trying to talk about it as openly as I can.
Yeah. While
it's still being like an unreleased game,
without crossing over into And by the way, in this scene that you're not supposed to see, yeah, exactly. I ran into this problem. Yeah, got it. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, NDAs, exactly. Someone says NDAs are bullshit. Anyway, so yeah, that's cool. Just trying to think about anything of the other ones. So the interesting thing that I'm kind of curious about is that were you, because you've always been interested in this sort of like trying to create music that has sort of nonlinear behavior frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And you started all the way back with your Flash game called January. In terms of the coding and the scripting required, and that sort of stuff, I mean, where did you start learning any of that stuff? Or had you always been sort of somewhat kind of dabbling in that thing from maybe, I don't know, your design days or something like that to some extent?
Right. Yeah, I think, so I had a couple of like small exposures to coding before I made January. And I made January probably in like 2008 or something, when I was still in college. But I had a very basic C++ class in high school.
Mm-hmm.
It might have even just been C. It was just like make like a bank account, like you it's like a open up the terminal and figure out like how much you spent this much money, and subtract this money from the balance, like really basic kind of thing. And I also had a
I was gonna say FizzBuzz.
Yeah, I don't. What does that mean? I don't know.
Oh, you don't know? You know what FizzBuzz?
No.
And we were just talking about modulo the last time we talked, but basically, it's a modulo exercise. It's like if it's a multiple of 3, you print fizz. If it's a multiple of 5, you print buzz, and if it's a multiple of both 3 and 5, you print fizz buzz.
Okay.
And it's like a
basically
it's like a skill that they often run to programmers if they want to find out if they know how to program.
Right.
They'll give them fizz buzz.
Right. Yeah, basically that level of sophistication. Actually, like when I was a kid, I had a friend who had showed me this program for Mac OS called Res Edit, and you could open up programs, and you could change the assets
Yep.
And so he used to do this. He used to like get games off the internet and like
Yep.
change all the graphics and the text and make
Yep.
him his own game.
Yeah.
And I used to do that too. It was really fun. I mean, there was no coding, but you know, that's like another
it's definitely hacking for sure.
Yeah, it's another touchstone. And then there's like when I was at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, for like a year,
that was
studying new media.
That was your new media phase. Okay, got it.
That was my previous college experience.
Yeah.
I had a course that was about like Flash and like we made a game in Flash, but it was like mostly using the timeline. You know, there was like very little code.
Right.
So I like had these little like, you know, cups of coffee here and there that had to do with like computer science. And then it wasn't until like I did game jams that I got really inspired to try to make something myself. And like going to GDC, you know, I went to some talks. I think I went to a talk by like Adam Saltzman about Flixel, which was like a Flash library from back in the day.
Yep.
And like an ActionScript library. And so that seemed like a good place for me to kind of start. And so I found like a Flixel tutorial of like how to make like a space shooter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, you know, it was like something that I could copy paste or like, you know, follow step by step in like an hour or something. And then I just started like hacking away at that and modifying it. And was like, well, what if you take this like shooter that goes left to right, the spaceship's on the left side, enemies on the right side, you just rotate it all like 90 degrees. You make your spaceship a person and you make the enemies, you know, the enemy bullets or whatever, like snowflakes. And if they hit you, they don't kill you. They just play a sound or something. Wow. So that's kind of where that started.
That's where January started, basically. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, very basic. And then over time, I just kind of like spent more and more time working at it and reading more like high level concept kind of stuff about
like the
Markov, like object
and the
like object oriented programming. Well, the Markov chain actually I stumbled into without knowing what it was. It just kind of was an idea that I had of like, you know, you look a snowflake, it plays a note. It's like, okay, what does it do next? It's like, well, if it was like a C, then maybe there's like a 50% chance it's this one and a 30% chance it's that one. And that I just kind of came up with that naturally. And then later I kind of learned that was basically just a Markov chain.
Yeah.
Like a hand authored Markov chain or something.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you think you're being original and you're like, oh yeah, that's already been thought of. Okay. But then sometimes it saves you work. You know, you just be like, oh, all I have to do is do this formula, and then that'll just automatically calculate what I want to have happen, rather than me having to do it by hand or whatever like that necessarily.
Yeah. Although sometimes it's nice to discover things that way. I mean,
yeah.
It probably led me down a path that I wouldn't have gone down otherwise.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we're sort of close to the halfway point. So I'm gonna sort of take a little bit of a station break a little bit and talk a little bit about the Game Audio Institute a bit. And then we will open it up for some questions. But I just wanted to see if other people would show up in the meantime, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, so this is the Game Audio Institute. We host this sort of thing. And, we're using this to sort of, give ourselves a little bit more exposure and things like that. But also, we are promoting a class in audio for virtual reality. And that's going to be starting in July. And I'll go to the website and share that with you briefly, and then we'll get back to this thing. So let's see what I have here. Okay, so then just open. Right. So basically, what it is it's a 8-week course. We have 5 weeks that we have, or 5 meetings that we basically share. That we're going to have happening. That are going to be in-person Zoom meetings. In-person virtual Zoom meetings. And the idea is that you're going to learn all about Unity, how to implement a VR and AR game in Unity. And also we'll be teaching you all about, VR and AR audio, basically spatial audio effectively. with as much up-to-date information as we can manage, including we'll probably mention Dolby Atmos, since that's now been, they're starting to move that into games. It's not there yet, but they've just been sort of kind of pre-announcing that. And I actually saw a job opening where I was like, a job opening in Dolby, and I was like, Dolby's going to try to make actual plugins for game engines and middleware with their Atmos stuff. So I would say you're going to see that in a very short amount of time. But anyway, the course that we have is basically it teaches you how to basically make a game. We have a test game that we have essentially. We have a week by week breakdown. We're going to teach you all about HRTF, what ambisonics is. We're going to talk about what's called audio propagation or sound propagation, which is a relatively new field. They haven't been doing it too much inside games per se, in terms of really, audio being affected by the actual geometry of the game, comparatively speaking, because it's been kind of a high level performant kind of situation. But anyway, it starts on July 12th, August 30th, and I'm going to paste a code that if you use this code, you'll get 15% off the course. And this code is not currently available for anybody else except the people who have actually just attended this talk. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, it'll be pretty cool. We definitely have gotten some pretty good stuff. A lot of the things is, I'll just copy this thing and I'll paste it into the chat. But basically, a lot of people that have attended the class, so this is the code for the VR 102 class. And basically the deal is that a lot of people have been getting a lot of middleware education, but what happens is they don't understand how it relates to the game engine. And that is super, super, super important. How it relates to the game, it's really important. And we definitely encountered students who were already well familiar with middleware, but then it turned out that the employer or the job that they were looking at was requiring them to have game engine experience on top of middleware experience. So it's one of those kinds of things where, this is going to be valuable, super valuable skill stuff for the future. So anyway, there's my plug. And we'll get around to going back to this and seeing some questions basically. So let's just open it up and see what we have for questions for Rich. Victor Kraus raised his hand. So Victor, ask the question.
Hey, thanks for the talk. You have like games, all the games you worked on seem to all have a very unified aesthetic to them, but they are not, but in and of themselves, they're still very diverse. How do you approach a game when you begin it that you kind of create this unified universe, but don't make it too samey at the same time?
Do you mean don't make it too similar to other experiences, other games?
Yeah. So like you want two tracks to sound like they're from the same universe, right, but you don't want them to be derivative of each other.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I would say what I tend to do a lot of times on projects is I have a preliminary period where I'm basically doing concept art, but music and sound, and starting to kind of establish a palette, and a palette being like instrument choices, but also harmonic choices, stylistic choices, maybe certain rhythms, or just like starting to build up a collection of ideas that I can use. And so I think going from segment to segment within something, you find over time, like there's just sort of like a process of you're developing a language, and there's shared components across these different pieces. Like it might be the instrumentation, or there might be, maybe there's a motif or something, like a thematic element that's recurring. But then everything else is what differentiates two pieces of music, or two in a game, maybe two locations or something like that. So I try to kind of come up with a process, like a creative process that maybe has some rules, but isn't like it's not too rigid. And the process is like something that is going to evolve naturally too over time, as like I'm faced with different challenges. There are different kinds of pieces of music that I need to write, and so forth. So yeah, I think the building up like a palette in the beginning, but then also like allowing that palette to evolve a little bit over the course of the project helps with, things not being too similar, but at the same time still having some kind of like consistency or through line between them.
How much time do you usually spend on that concept phase?
It depends. Sometimes I might spend a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Other times I do it while I'm working. So sometimes I just start working on a project. I just boot up my DAW and I just start writing. And I try not to spend too much time fleshing out sounds, but just enough to get me going. And then I just start slowly collecting sounds. And then, as I have new pieces of music to write, I may start incorporating some other sounds into that palette, while also still keeping the sounds that I've already made or used in mind. And in that way, like it can have sort of like a natural kind of evolution. But I think in general, I'm just trying to explain like an intuitive process. It's not something that I am very militant about, or like I'm not super like rigid about it, but I think generally having a palette that sort of evolves is kind of like how I tend to go about it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, anybody else have a question? Ryan.
Hey, thanks for the talk. My question is, what kind of themes or story structures or game mechanics influence your adaptivity decisions? How does the game really make you come up with adaptive solutions?
Yeah. I guess my process is that I try to like collect as much information as possible about the experience. I try to play the game as much as I can, kind of get a broad sense of everything. Try to get a really solid understanding of what the story is. And then I start to build like a mental map of the game, like a structural map of how things relate to each other. And that might be locational. It might have to do with characters, or like, plot points. All these sort of things matter. And those become potential targets for developing concepts that could work, adaptivity concepts. At the same time, there's a certain value in starting simple, and then maybe fleshing things out when the opportunity presents itself. It's really easy to get kind of stuck or trapped in like a very kind of elaborate system that ends up being more trouble than it's worth. So it's definitely, the adaptivity sort of question is something that I definitely try to walk into very cautiously, so that I'm not like stepping into a situation that is going to create a lot of overhead and headaches. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that is kind of an intuitive process for me. It's just like gathering as much information as I can, and then basically trying to build some sort of map, that finding connections between things that are, they could be of the same category, like building connections between locations, be cross-disciplinary connections, like a connection between a location and a character, or connection between a mechanic and a character. You know, there's so many different possibilities there. I think there's questions also to be had about what does the game actually need? Like what would the game benefit from versus like what your personal kind of objectives might be or desires, because a lot of times those don't line up they don't necessarily line up well, and you might be it's possible to try to make a certain system or idea fit for a project where it would be better suited to maybe something else. These are all things that I would think about when thinking about it, like kind of like a music system or an adaptivity type system. I think if you're in a project where there's a lot of like things are a little bit in flux in the beginning, like it might be nice to just experiment and try some different things, as long as it's not something that has too much that you can prototype relatively easily, and it's not going to be like super crazy, because everything that you do on a project, in my opinion, is not necessarily a waste. Like there's always some kind of byproduct to it, whether it's music that, you know, could maybe be used elsewhere, or an idea for a design or a system that you could maybe utilize in a different project. Yeah, I try to wrestle with all those things when I'm trying to make decisions.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Sure.
All right, Anthony, I think you had your hand. There you go.
Hey, yeah, thanks very much for the talk as well. A question that I had in my mind was just hoping you could literally expand on the Solar Ash team, the audio team specifically. I was actually a bit surprised that you were TSD initially. I thought I just for some reason assumed you were going to be composer. So maybe if you could expand on that kind of back and forth relationship working with the composer from this new role, and also maybe just the process of being in an audio team on a much bigger project compared to usual, the positives and negatives that arrive at that.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with the second half. So when you're working with a really big team, there's a certain loop that you kind of have to get used to, which is like the amount of content that's being created. The more people that are creating content, the more challenging it is to kind of react from an audio perspective to everything that's being made. So kind of requires more resources to kind of keep up with everything. And that's definitely one of the things that was kind of a hard-earned lesson, because there were times where the size of the team was like, the audio team was smaller and it was fine. But then as the, other departments maybe got bigger and bigger, it required the audio team to also kind of evolve and change, not only in size, but also in like roles and like what people do. So it seems like, I mean, personally, like I've always kind of preferred smaller projects that are easier to handle, but obviously when you have a lot of people, there's a certain potential to kind of do certain things that you wouldn't be able to do with a smaller team, but that comes with a lot of new sort of problem sets that you have to handle. Like certain, like, I guess managing things becomes trickier and more necessary. When things were smaller, it was pretty easy to just kind of operate in almost in like an anarchic kind of way, just like doing things how we want and not really, not having to like have like project management essentially. So all of that stuff was a big part of that experience. As far as like my role on the project, it's just one of those things, I think, where, there were a lot of attempts made, and it just sometimes for whatever reason, it just doesn't feel like the right fit. And ultimately, there are also, when you're involved in a project for a really long time, the way that a project starts out is going to be completely different than the way that it finishes, and that's just totally normal and natural, because the project is evolving as the team is learning things about what they're making. And so I think sort of where I was when I started, and the kinds of things that I wanted to accomplish, like ultimately became, they ultimately ended up not being the right sort of things for the project. Certainly there was a lot of work that I was able to do, and a lot of systems work, primarily like audio systems type stuff that I got to experiment with and build, that ended up being really useful to the project. But there were, in other areas, there were like challenges that were surprising, and you know, working on something for 5 years, like, you know, that's a long time. I'm a totally different person now than I was 5 years ago, and you know, it just sometimes it doesn't line up quite the way that you think it will. But you know, I think things have kind of like shaked out in a way that makes a lot of sense, and you know, I've been happy with my role on the project, and you know, the music is turning out really well, and I've been, you know, like just kind of being a resource for that kind of stuff. You know, I definitely have lots of opinions about music, so it's been easy to participate in that way. And it's been fun kind of putting on a different hat. I mean, I've done a fair amount of implementation work, especially on like the Dino Polo Club projects that I've worked on, Mini Metro, Mini Motorways. That was primarily C#, and this is, a lot of it is blueprints, which is like different and fun, and sort of my first foray into visual scripting. So and just all the 3D stuff, like building environmental audio systems and stuff like that, has been really challenging and interesting, and definitely learning a lot about geometry has been really cool, and it's definitely going to help me in the future with other projects, as far as like all the things that I've learned about how to, you know, how to make things work in three dimensions. So
yeah,
I'm guessing you had a pretty healthy relationship with the tools programmer.
What tools program?
Oh my God, serious. I assumed that
so,
all the geometry work was so that you could maybe give a rough technical design doc / a prototype, and then hand it over to a team to actually recreate the idea. But it's sounding now like, nope, had to do it all myself.
yeah, we did a lot of the tools and system stuff for audio ourselves. It was a really good learning experience. In hindsight, it would have, you know, it's nice to have like a dedicated audio programmer for that kind of stuff. But we've had a lot of engineering support for like optimization and that sort of thing. It's just kind of been, it's been more like, you know, front loaded with building designs and tools and then optimizing things later. So that has its own sort of pros and cons, I suppose. But yeah.
Cool. I was kind of curious. Actually, I was going to ask a question on the Mini Metro. When you were first involved with that project, did you actually start playing ideas directly, let's say, in your DAW with the sound that you were thinking about before you did the coding, or was it really just automatically kind of coding involved from the very beginning, and that's how you started prototyping the sounds for the game? Because I'm kind of curious about that, because obviously when you're playing in the Mini Metro game and you've got like, say, just a little bit more than a couple of lines running with a couple of trains running, you start really starting to hear the musical chordal harmonic development of this piece of music. So I was kind of curious if you kind of mocked that up, you know, sort of linearly to begin with, and then changed it.
I did a little bit. It's not a great like one-to-one relationship to try to mock up video footage of a game like that in a DAW. So it would often be like 30 seconds of gameplay or something before I was like getting annoyed, because it's so to do that way. But I did want to do some of that up front to help me kind of figure out the directions that I wanted to go in.
Yeah.
I had I think from the beginning, I had some relatively clear ideas about, wanting to have like pulsing sequences of notes, and for it to have a certain like harmonic and rhythmic context. But it was still a matter of like figuring out, what game objects get what sort of sounds, like, discovering that the lines should be the ones that are pulsing, like all these kind of things were things that I discovered through a combination of doing a couple of like linear mock-ups, but then also a lot of just thinking and writing. I did a lot of writing too, like just like Google Docs, thinking about like the relationships between game objects, and a lot of nights laying in bed just thinking about like how all this stuff is supposed to work together. But then alongside that, it was having a good candidate for how to actually implement this stuff. And for us, that ended up being a Unity asset store plugin that
G Audio, right?
G Audio, yeah.
That's the one that I suggested to you, actually. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
there may have been other people who suggested that one, but that's the one that because we met each other, and you were looking for some kind of thing that could do like decent like procedural audio in C#. And I was like, well, you should try G Audio because it's really tight. And, and unfortunately, it was one of those flash in the pan things that lasted for like 2 or 3 years, and then it was gone. And it doesn't run in any normal modern version of Unity anymore. But the guy, it was as good as the current Unreal version 5 engine meta sound. Like one of the things that Aaron was actually demonstrating in a recent thing. Aaron McLaren's the guy that programs the audio engine for Epic. He's got a really long storied career. It's awesome. Anyway, but the deal is that he was actually showing like a little tiny thing, and then he sped it up to like 4,000% faster, and you can actually hear this actually playing at 4,000%. This engine, this G Audio engine, could do that thing. They could literally play a sequence of notes and speed it up to literally granular levels of speed. It was unbelievably, like, for C#, that's pretty amazing that somebody could make an engine that did that. But then he essentially sort of open sourced it, and then it just went away basically because it couldn't see later versions of Unity.
Yeah, but so I guess we just kind of ran with it, and still using it, a heavily modified version of it. And there's definitely been some certain operations have been moved to C, like to lower level languages, to make it more optimized. But yeah, basically just having like a sample accurate playback was sort of, I remember actually looking at like Fmod and being like, oh, this isn't going to work for what we're trying to do at the time, because I think it wasn't really like it wasn't as prevalent of a feature that people are looking for at that stage as it is now.
It is kind of interesting though, because of the fact that there's no real hardcore rhythm that's in the game as far as I can recall, right? It's very floaty in general as far as rhymically speaking, right? It's not like
it's super discrete. All the rhythms are very discrete. It can get pretty quick. There's septuplets and different kinds of triplets, 16th notes, all that kind of stuff.
But are they actually hooked to a grid relative to each other? So in other words, okay, you can actually hear their rhythmic relationship. It's funny because to me, at least based on like watching like half an hour or so of it, it feels more like floaty and ambient to me, and I don't hear the rhythmic underpinnings quite so strongly to me. But
the sounds are very ambient, so it probably doesn't like announce itself super strongly. Well, but it's there. It's all synced to the same to like a master pulse or whatever.
Well, the thing, of course, is that when someone playing the game, they're having to constantly like interrupt the sounds to like marshal all their stuff and change things around and set lines, and then they can release it, and then the game starts to play again, right? There's a lot of this back and forth between sort of inventory management and playing the game effectively,
Yeah, there's sort of a blend between like, well, there are certain sounds that need to be immediate, right? Because they're UI sounds, and you want to have that immediate feedback. You don't want to schedule the sound to play on a quantized grid or something.
Right.
But there are a lot of things in the gameplay that do that, that are from other like things that affect the simulation of your subway system in the game.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's weird in the sense that the game actually requires the audio engine to run it all, because we made some really strange choices where there were certain like the appearance of passengers and these sorts of things. Like we really wanted them to be musical, so it ended up just kind of working in a weird way where we had the audio system kind of set up to, where you're designing maps for different cities and stuff, and you could change the frequency of things kind of popping up, like, oh, I want this to pop up at a quarter note triplets or something, and that would literally change the game design to some degree. So
yeah, and then
there's a lot of power. Had to be careful.
Yeah, and you also had like a speed of gameplay, which I guess then changes the tempo of everything that's running as well, right? I mean, so or am I wrong about that?
Yeah,
because you had speed.
Well, the tempos are a lot. The tempos were sort of like, I guess it's possible that I could screw up the entire game by changing the tempo, but we were in agreement about the tempo.
So in other words, the tempo was
there's there's like a 1x. Yeah, there's like a 1x tempo. The tempo already existed, and then the audio system was set up to accommodate or to to match the tempo that they'd already come up with. Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay, so that's cool. Oh, by the way, and I was going to say to the people here assembled that there's a fantastic 1:15 long video where you get to actually see his whole process for making the Shinkansen sound in Mini Metro. That's one of the more informative things, especially from an aspect of saying, here's kind of what a modern game composer could be doing, in a game that's very adaptive. Like this is how you're going to have to prepare the assets. This is, in his case, he had to actually create 40 or so assets, for every single sound he had to make. He made like a chromatic alteration of that sound, and then he had to figure out how to automate that whole process so that it would go reasonably fast into the game. And so this is it's a great video, so you should watch it on his channel because it's super informative in terms of how he was able to kind of automate this process essentially. And because that's going to be useful just in general, like batch processing and things like that. I'm sure you use that. You learned that over time when you were like having to turn around assets and you'd be like, oh God, I can't edit.
It's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
Yeah, my hands would just like go away. Yeah, I can totally give a link if you want to. That's fine. Here we go. Let's see here. And yeah, anyone else want to ask a question? Go ahead, please. Please do. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll jump in with another. So I was actually wondering, I guess now, Rich, your time, the ratio between maybe composition versus maybe technical audio versus just being an organizer, planner, and maybe the other stuff you'd have going on the side that you're trying to get going as well in the last few months. Like where's that kind of ratio of time for you right now?
Yeah. I mean, those ratios have changed a lot over the course of my career as my priorities have changed. These days, I'm not writing a ton of music these days, but I definitely go through phases. I say I'm very phase-oriented kind of person. So right now, I've been spending, first of all, I've been traveling, so I'm kind of like, not operating at full capacity. But work-wise, I've been doing probably, I'd say maybe like a third to half of my time right now is dedicated to technical, like audio type tasks, whether it's like technical sound design stuff that I'm doing in Solar Ash or support, like ongoing support that I do for Dino Polo Club for Mini Metro, Mini Motorways. And then the rest has been more like self-focused because I've been kind of branching out and planning to kind of release some of my own projects and software. I have a bunch of have a bunch of music software that I've been developing, and I also have some music that I'm prepping for release. And then I also spend a lot of time kind of like doing personal inventory, like writing. And I recently got into this thing called second braining, which is like, it's like note taking. That's like kind of like building your own Wikipedia, basically. And it's been kind of helping me like with like the ideation process, like coming up with like what I'm going to do next and just staying really organized. So that's kind of where I've been at these days. But certainly in the past, you know, there were times where the large majority of what I was doing was maybe dedicated towards music, or, you know, maybe, I mean, there are other, I mean, I'm probably being a little bit generic because there's definitely other areas that I have to maintain. I mean, there's the communication, there's, you know, the website, there's, you know, there's all the music like publishing type stuff that is kind of important to build over time, whether it's like your like digital distribution stuff, or, you know, like, you know, making sure your music is registered with like royalty organizations, all that kind of stuff. That's like a small chunk of the time too. Yeah, there's a lot of different kind of things, a lot of different tasks, and that's always been something that I've liked about it. I've always liked kind of wearing all the different hats.
Wow, that's interesting. So I was kind of curious to me, because it's like, you know, because it seems like, you know, you're definitely you've got your music sort of side of yourself, and then you've got the sort of programming and technical side of yourself as well. It does seem that, like, you know, you're pursuing, are you interested in pursuing both? You said you're sort of more heading in the technical direction at this point in time. It seems like is what you're saying.
Just right now, because I've built a lot of like fully featured prototypes for music software that I want to release.
Right.
So that's kind of where I am right now. But that doesn't mean that I won't like circle back and get more into a music creation sort of phase.
If you have an opportunity to, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say it's less about like going technical versus creative or music. It's more about like, for me, it's more of a self-directed period where I'm focused more on my own sort of projects as opposed to commission-based projects.
Got it. I see. Right.
Yeah.
That's cool. So in terms of anybody trying to get into this business, I'm sure this is like the question you always get asked if there's any students or whatever, is like,
of course,
you know, what kinds of advice would you give to, you know, people who want to get into this industry, either as a composer, as a sound designer, as a, you know, anything like that? What would you say are let's say 3 most important skills to have, or something like that?
I mean, you got to work hard, and you got to show up. You got to put yourself in situations, put yourself out there, whether that's like meeting new people, going to events, just like really stepping outside your comfort zone a little bit, I think, in order to give yourself the best chance to you know, find opportunities, work on cool things. And I guess I can just say what worked for me, which was to just be really open to trying new things, and like incorporating those as far as like, or integrating the lessons that I kind of picked up from those, as far as what works for me, what doesn't, what I like to do, what I don't like to do. And in the beginning, I just said yes to a lot of different things. And then over time, I gradually said no more and more, so that I could sort of like craft the kind of career that I wanted to have. Yeah. Okay. Be open, say yes a lot in the beginning, try stuff, show up.
Yeah, show up. Yeah, especially on the first day at game jams. My biggest mistake was I showed up at the second day on the game jam, and that was the mistake. You know, it was like too late by that point. All the it was interesting. I still was able to help somebody solve a problem, but you know, it was like that was it. You know, you're not really involved in the decision making processes anymore if you show up on the second day of the game jam. Anyway. So last question I'll ask you, and I'm pretty sure I kind of know the answer to this question because you were talking about doing the chiptune gigs in Boston. Is that where the name Disasterpeace came from? Like you needed a performance name for those particular situations, or had you always sort of had that in the back of your mind that that would be a cool moniker to have? And was that related to your design expertise as well? Because it does, I mean, there's a definite graphic design expertise that's going on there with that really cool logo and stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, so when I was a teenager, maybe like 17 or 18, I wanted to start a band, and I was kind of messing around with different names, and I came up with Disasterpeace. And before the, and of course there was never a band, but I used to do this all the time growing up. I would come up with names for things, and then I would like draw out, you know, like a logo or like branding. Like I always like to do that kind of stuff, and so that's kind of where it came from. And it was initially it was Disasterpeace, Piece. And then I learned that there was a Slipknot song with that name, so I changed it. But I ended up liking the change better anyway, because it kind of gave it additional meanings. And I mean,
a bit of an oxymoron as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, very interesting. I like the sort of super contrast between the two.
And more than anything, I'm just like, I feel lucky that I picked something.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd say that that probably wraps it up at this point. Any maybe one more question, and then I think we'll be done. Is that it? Oh, one more from Anthony. He's gonna take advantage if he can.
Yeah, I waited. I was like, is there anyone else who wants to take it? But no one jumped in. So the last thing for me would just be like, at this point in projects that you're working on, are you also finding yourself involved in the later stage mixing process, or is that usually given up to other hands?
Yeah, I've sort of experimented with that. I definitely like to be involved in kind of the finalizing process of my music. But there's definitely a value in working with other people, especially people who have a fresh perspective on what you're doing, because you can get really kind of in your own head about something when you're so close to it. So I think for me, you know, I try to take it as far as I can until I maybe have gotten almost burnt out, which is maybe not the best way to do it, but I mean, for like mastering or something like that, you know, I try to bring in somebody else. But that's more like for like soundtrack, like standalone soundtracks or standalone music. But like I said, I like to experiment, and every project is a little bit different. If I really want to like get into like, you know, synth like production or something, like I probably do a lot of that work myself, especially towards the end. But if it's like, you know, like I did a piano album, and that to me was like not necessarily my area of expertise at all. So I just focused on like the composition, making sure that like, you know, that, and the performance, making sure that like directing that experience, because I had this project Disasters for Piano where I worked with an arranger and a concert pianist. And so my role in that was basically being a director, and, you know, helping make like creative decisions about editing and stuff like that. But then I brought in somebody else to do like, you know, mixing and like light production and mastering and all that kind of stuff. So I think I like to try to like think about each project as its own thing, and think about like what would be best for the project and what are my personal goals for it. And if I can defer or like hand off certain things to other people, like I'm more than happy to do that. It's just it's really hard for me to do that. So I'm always looking for ways to do it, because it's such a challenge to let go, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that's pretty much all we have time for at this point in time. We'll Game Audience 2 will keep doing this thing, but we'll like to thank for sure Rich for taking time out of the day to answer all of our questions and stuff like that. So big hand for Rich for sure. And that's basically about it. You know, if you want to stay in touch with us at the Game Audio Institute, we are at gameaudioinstitute.com, and we're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and stuff like that. So give us a shout if you have any questions on any of our stuff. And we will see you in the next ones, folks. So have a good time.
Thanks so much.
Yep. Enjoy.
Thank you.